This is the, let's see what it is. It's the Nuremberg Trials presentation, and glad to have you all here. So we're doing this together. This is Steve Chapman, Manager of Digital Strategies and Digitization at the Harvard Law School Library. I'm Paul Deschner, I'm a developer at the Innovation Lab in the same place. We're co-managing this project, and we're presenting together. So I thought I'd start out with one of my favorite pictures of the Nuremberg trials. This is, so there are similarities with the Harvard archive. This is actually not. This is a picture of the mimeograph room at the Nuremberg tribunals in the late 40s. And it can serve maybe as a starting place for the kind of challenge we were presented with when we began this project in the late 1990s. And as a destination, this is a slide that shows the kind of experience we're hoping to be able to give our users, which is contextualized, field-based discovery, with the endpoint being the original documents themselves, or visual surrogates of the original documents. So that's our challenge, and that's what we're hoping to tell you about today. A little bit of background. You probably all know about the Nuremberg tribunals, especially the international military tribunal, the one that prosecuted the main actors in the Nazi regime. That was followed, or it was partially overlapped, and then followed by 12 national military tribunals. The International Military Tribunal, as the title suggests, is adjudicated by all 4 Allied powers. So national military tribunals, and there were 12 of them, were adjudicated only by the United States. That's one reason why we have the document collection here in this country. They were divided up by theme. There were, for example, there was a medical trial, the first case. There was a judge's trial. There was a trial looking into the crimes committed against civilian populations in the Balkans and things like that. So they sort of considered to be less major, but nonetheless important trials. And so there are 13 trials in all. Harvard received in 1949 a complete set of both the IMT and the NMT archive set. The National Archives also received a full set, and the International Court of Justice at The Hague received the originals. So there were document sets that were relatively complete outside the one that we have, but the unique quality about Harvard's collection and the National Archives as well is that they contain a fairly complete record of the national military tribunals. Most places have the international military tribunal materials, but the national military tribunals, if it's not just a cherry-picked publication of what went on there, that is relatively rare. It's a unique collection in that respect that we're able to work with. So a little bit about the scope. It's roughly 1 million document pages, 700 boxes of materials. Of those 1 million pages, about 65–70% are in scope for our project, which does not attempt to work with the materials that are in German and are duplicated in English. So we're leaving those aside for the moment. That's not in our initial project specification. The major problem with this archive at Harvard for 50 years, from 1949 when we got it, until about 1999 when the pilot project to explore the scalability of this project in a digital context was that they were basically inaccessible. They existed in a bunch of very poorly labeled boxes, might have had the trial written on the side, that the documents inside pertained to, maybe the document series, if they were evidence file documents. And they existed in filing cabinets distributed throughout various basements in the law school library system. There was basically no way for a researcher, even though they were open at that point to the public, there was almost no way for a researcher to be able to find materials that they would be interested in, because there was no index, there was no finding aid. Another problem was, and I think this was one of the reasons also why it became more critical in the 90s, was that people began to realize that the documents themselves were deteriorating. They were on sheet mimeograph paper, or in the case of photostats, slightly better, but they were really crumbling before people's eyes, and if we didn't do something at that point to preserve them, let alone make them accessible, but just to preserve them, then the chances of their being usable at all were going to go down sharply in the years following. So in the late 90s, an initiative was started at the law school in which essentially the digital technology platform as it existed at that time was going to be explored to see if it couldn't provide both digitization of the originals, thereby serving the purpose of preservation, as well as access using digital search, essentially. And so the project was started 16 years ago now. It's had a progression that has been defined by the availability of funding. The project needs money. This one is no exception. This one probably needs more than most because of the scale of the project. And we've had maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different funding grants or funding opportunities in that 16-year period. And we moved forward as we could with the amount of money that was given to us. But that is one reason why we've come so far and have somewhat less, or a good deal less than a full experience of the documents online. The audience that we're targeting, originally it was thought to be essentially a researcher-centric experience that we were most interested in, but then we started getting feedback from people, high school students, for example, who were doing project work in the Nuremberg topic area, also from people who had personal relationships to either the trials themselves or the people who were in the trials. And so there was an attempt to fold them in as well into the audience that we were targeting. So it became, in the words of our document analyst, a very bright 10th grader all the way up through an academic researcher who we were going to design our search experience for so that they could connect with the documents. I was talking about the brittleness of the documents. This is just a slight impression. As you can see, the page edges here are beginning to get to a point where it's going to cause major tearing later on. This is a very typical mimeograph sheet in our collection. I mentioned the other repositories that receive these documents. This is the International Court of Justice in The Hague, where the originals, we don't have the originals, we have copies of the originals, where the originals are maintained. I'm not entirely sure what kind of access is currently granted to those collections and in what state they are, whether it's just physical materials or whether they try to photograph them in any way and make them available that way. Here at the National Archives, we read that there's supposed to be a full document record, both the transcripts as well as the documents themselves, the ones that were used in the trials and used as a source for the documents that were used in the trials. They have used microfilm. They don't have them available digitally, but they have microfilmed them, and you can purchase microfilms for these documents. So they're not they're not accessible at all to people who are remotely located. You have to go to the National Archives and look at them there, or you have to order the microfilm to be able to deal with their document collection. The Library of Congress has transcripts in the context of bound publications for the various, for the IMT and for the various NMTs made available, or they make them available in the form of PDFs, which are text searchable. So that at least is another step forward in making them available to remote users. But each PDF is siloed within itself. There's no cross-file searching capability, and they are PDFs, so they are what they are. They're sort of cumbersome to use, but they do have the transcripts there. This was an interesting email I came across, which I think presents maybe what we're doing that would argue for actually taking this into a digital context. This is an archivist at The Hague, at the International Court of Justice, who had worked there for perhaps 30 years. And when we launched in 2003, he sent us this mail saying, why are you even considering doing this? Your document record is not unique. It exists, as we knew, at the National Archives. It's here at The Hague. In fact, there are things that they have that you don't have, so why are you wasting your time? And so our response is, of course, that, well, it's true, the document collections are similar. In some cases, ours is just a subset, but they're basically inaccessible unless you happen to be on-site or you're willing to work with relatively cumbersome digital surrogates. So it's all about access, and that's the main point of our project, access and preservation. Another key feature of our project, another key goal for our project is to make the originals, the digital versions of originals available to users. Of course, with this kind of material, You get people who will be skeptical to the very end, and so it serves the purposes of the project to be able to offer an experience of the original documents as much as possible. And so we include in our document selection the photostats which were created by Tribunal of the original source documents in German. And I think it's important that we include those. We think it's important that these be included precisely for that reason. The document structure is important within Nuremberg. It drives a lot of our different workflows, both on the digitization side as well as on the metadata side. And I've tried to summarize it here with this diagram. Essentially, there are two main collections of documents within the collection, within the archive. We have the so-called evidence file documents, which are the original source documents that were gathered together as being relevant for the kinds of things that were going to take place at the tribunals. So the raw materials that were actually collected by the Allies in the last months of the war and immediately thereafter were examined for their relevance for the cases that were going to be adjudicated, and they were assembled into this evidence file collection, which you see on the left here. It came in 4 versions of the same document in each case. So they took a picture of the original document, the photostat picture. Then from that photostat, they transcribed the text into German and made it available in TypeScript format. There was an English translation made of that TypeScript, also made available as TypeScript. And then there was a staff evidence analysis conducted by one of the staff members at the tribunals to give lawyers who were working on the case a thumbnail impression of what the document was about, so they wouldn't have to read the whole thing and could decide whether they wanted to use it in the particular case they were involved with. So these were basically used then by the prosecution. These, of course, were documents that were supposed to help in indicting and eventually convicting these people. And so you tend to find them mainly on the prosecution side. One of these document versions was typically chosen by the prosecution to be presented as evidence in the trial. And then its status changed from being an evidence file to being a case file, what we call a case file, a file that's actually used within the case. So you could conceivably have had an evidence file that was used in multiple NMT cases, for example, each time possibly changing its local relevance depending on what was happening. But not everything came through the evidence file collection. The defendants, of course, they had their own document collections. They, as a rule, were not taken from the evidence files for natural reasons. Those are also available in the case file collection. And you also had documents that were created outside of the evidence file collection for the prosecution, things like indictments, opening and closing remarks, and briefs that were prepared. So our ambition is to include everything, as I said before, except for those that have duplicates in English and German when we don't include the German. So all of the evidence files as well as all the case files. This is simply a transcript. We have them in Harvard in bound format. They have a relatively uniform typeface, which is relatively good and offers prospects that we'd like to explore for digitization and OCR. And then we get to the digitization component, which Steve will tell you about.
Right, so this year we're opportunistic about moving forward on digitization when we have the money. So the mandate is there, it's been there for 15 years, as Paul outlined to you, to have a collection of 1 million pages and somehow to organize them as useful, independently described documents that are in electronic form, freely available from our website. So this year we received the next big infusion of money that enabled us to hire an analyst to continue with the deeper metadata analysis Paul will describe for one of the trials. And there was another metadata specialist that we'll talk about later that we reserved funds for. The remaining funds numbered a little bit over $80,000, which is quite a bit of money, but we also had quite a few documents. So I just wanted to scope this at the beginning to say, with around $80,000 and millions of pages of documents and about 8 months of time, how much could you do? So that's what we took on in assembling the team, where we had the people, the workflows, and the technology that I'll describe to begged the question that we had, because this, the question that we had, which was, how many things could we do for those dollars? This wasn't a kind of a grant context where we had to stipulate before we got the money who would do the work, what the cost per page would be. Instead, this really maps nicely to the kind of experimentation that we do in our lab, which is with university money that they granted to us. They said, look, the objective is for you to open access to this hidden collection. And as one of Harvard's key hidden collections, in giving you this much money, we challenge you basically to do as much as you can. So that became the framing context. And we said, fine, we're going to have at it. So with the scoping of working with the case and evidence files, not the transcripts, and the scoping of working primarily on English language materials, we paged 360 boxes from our high-density storage facility, brought them to Langdale Hall, the law school library, and we proceeded from there. And at the end, what we found from doing the preparation, scanning, and OCR, that there were just over 4,300 folders of material distributed in those boxes. And within those folders, about 414,000 pieces of paper that would be in the typescript format or the mimeograph format, not the photostats. So we couldn't handle the photostats with the machine that we had now, so we skipped over those and focused on the typescripts. We had a team that had sometimes as many as 7 people, but I'd say on average it was about 4 full-time equivalents. And again, if you just think about the number of dollars that we spent, I think it's easier to sort of map that to how you would adapt this to your workflow. But not excluding Paul and me and the metadata analyst, we had as many as 5 or 6 other people that were addressing the tasks of starting from these kinds of boxes and preparing the materials for digitization and improving the storage conditions for long-term archiving, and then following the preparation to undertake scanning and the quality control of the scanned pages. The box labels that we have here, there's the large label with a large barcode, and to the left of that, in that box on the top right, you can see a smaller sticker. Those are the unique barcodes for the boxes, and that became an important component for us to express relationships, the surrogates to the originals, and then in the hierarchy that we had there. So the first step in the process, we begin with boxes, and from those boxes, and these are just images of where they're stored in a couple of different locations in Langdale Hall temporarily, but you get the idea of scale. In the photograph here, that's double stacked, so as many boxes as you see on the front shelf, there are an equal number of boxes behind them. At the end, what we're trying to do in each box is produce this result, having things inserted into new acid-free folders where our folks were transcribing the information from the previous old deteriorating folders. So we were fortunate that there had already been a certain amount of analysis on this, although there were many boxes that had pages in the correct sequence, but very little interpretation. So this wasn't full archival processing, but it did go a little bit beyond just simply putting things into sequence with, say, a barcode label. So on the right, I know that the labels are small there. We have a box number, and then beneath that box number on each folder, there is the box barcode -2. That would be the second folder in that particular box. So that's kind of the intellectual control as well as the preservation of putting things into folders. But what also made this time consuming was removing all of the fasteners that were present in the originals. So one of our technicians wasn't the neatest worker, but this was only after a 3-hour shift. This gives you the idea of the quantity of fasteners that we were encountering. Those are bad for scanning, for the auto page feed scanner that I'm about to show you. So the fasteners inhibit scanning, but they also are rusting and transfer bad things to the original paper. So we, most of the time on this project and the digitization workflow that I'm describing to you, most of the time was invested in prep. So for every 1 hour scanning, where we had just one scanning operator at one machine, we needed about 3 corresponding hours of work to prepare materials for scanning, to keep up with the scanner, as well as to do quality control after scanning. So that was kind of the rough ratio in our particular project. And these are just nice illustrations of just how much material was involved in the preparation, a little bit of whimsy from one of our technicians, making the hard shape of all of the removed fasteners. The other thing that I don't have photographs of would be the assessment of pages that were torn, and we did, with training from our conservation technicians, do some repair of the tears to keep the pages intact so that, again, they can go through scanning and be safely handled by folks. So identifying condition issues, remediating condition issues, removing the fasteners, labeling the folders. You do that through 4,700 folders. It adds up. So we completed that work in 14 weeks. Again, what we want to do on the digital side is maintain this important relationship at this point in the project of scanning to the original, and the unit of scanning is the folder. So one of our developers on our team, Andy, made this really quick, nice web-based tool where we had a barcode reader, and by putting the barcode reader into this app, sorry, the top part is cut off, we could generate a printed barcode sheet, and this printed barcode sheet is just temporarily there with the brittle page documents beneath it in the folder, and that is the first thing that we scan. And the result in our scanning software is that we have an accurate transcription of that barcode, the semantics of the barcode, which have NRMB for the project, hyphen box number, the unique barcode, hyphen 6, so that was folder 6, and then we just derive our file naming from this. So if we never had a database or things got sort of blown away or separated on our file server, there's an organizing principle that makes sense to any of us that have that manifest of the original boxes. But
this is the name of the folder, right?
yes, name of the folder. So again, we are starting from those boxes, each one containing a folder. So if the boxes are the input on prep, each folder is the output. Now in scanning, each one of these folders is the input for which we need to make a corresponding digital folder on the output. Yes, sir?
Is the metadata at the box and the folder level? Or
no. So the metadata that we have that expresses the relationship and the hierarchy is at folder and box. So I'll just stop here with this file name. So what we would have here, the barcode the barcode is a proxy of a box number. So what you see there as HL56Z42, that's metadata for the box, but our end users don't care about boxes being presented in an online environment. But we want to have an implicit relationship of documents back to the box. So the proxy of the box for the box is that barcode number, and then the hyphen 6 is that folder belongs to that box. But what we're ultimately going to do, as we talk to you in the next few minutes of the presentation, is extract documents from the folder. And because each folder that we have here might contain multiple documents. So it's our job at the end of this process to move beyond the physical organization of folders to go to the granularity of these things called documents that would be comprised of multiple pages. When we produce these electronic documents that are correctly identified, their file names map back to these folders and boxes, but the unit of description and all of the metadata that we're going to generate from that point forward attaches itself to the document rather than to the folder or box. But it doesn't appear that I answered your question, sorry.
Oh, no, you did. May I ask a follow-up?
Please.
Is the metadata for, when you finish, will the metadata for the document be in the document itself embedded, or is it just inside of the system as you find it?
It's not going to be embedded in these digital page images. It's going to be associated in a database that Paul will walk us through. Excellent. Okay, so we'll proceed now with quickly just with a picture of the machine that we use. One of the reasons that we received the funding from the Harvard Library this year is because they were aware of the fact that we already had leased a high-speed scanning machine in Langdal Hall that we had been using in a pilot project last year for more modern materials. And so we had this machine, and with modern materials, we were getting an average of 20,000 pages scanned per day. So our question, this was opportune funding for us, because as we finished a pilot project of scanning modern materials, before we returned this machine, we received the funds for our other project, and we made sure that if we received funds for these Nuremberg transcripts, that this would be a viable technology to use for that. So we did a little bit of testing with our brittle paper, and we were delighted to find that we could feed brittle pages through this system and maintain high yields. The yields that we had for the older material in poorer condition weren't as high as the modern, but they're much higher than we were able to achieve in previous years with flatbed scanners or digital cameras. So we really like this technology. We're trying to generalize and use this scanning technology for as many things as we can, because our objective is to, which I believe all of you share, would be for the funds that we have, let's get as many things produced as we possibly can, and we also want to do things quickly so that we move things forward from when we have pages, move things away from the printed material downstream to where people can use tools and start applying the metadata and getting them online. So the scanner, with Andrew, our lead tech there in the photograph, you get an idea of the scanner size and the room that we have it in, and the three key components in terms of paper handling that are patented by IBML, the company that manufactures the machine. The three key components then would be an appropriate feeder, and here you see an entire folder's worth of pages that are all stacked in that feeder. And then beyond the feeder, there are two cameras. The one on the left is photographs the top of the page, and then I've lifted the cover of the one on the bottom so that you can see that there's a light source beneath there. So there are two cameras, and as the document passes on the track, the top side is photographed by camera A and the bottom side is photographed by camera B. Most of the most of the rectos, or the rectos have the typescript, and most of our typescripts, the versos, the opposite page, are blank, that they have no information. But one of the things we like about this machine, in addition to its speed, is that it's going to output scans of both the top side and the reverse side in full color at a size accurate to the original, helping fulfill our objective that we generalize to all projects to produce digital surrogates that are authoritative, persistent, and useful. So we want to make them in ways that foster preservation. The usefulness really comes from the metadata, and they're authoritative to the extent that we have a facsimile representation of the condition and appearance of these documents as they are today. And then finally, we have this stacking system at the end. This is the part of the machine that we were worried about that might tear the pages, but we were delighted to see that in operation that things proceeded nicely. So this is an actual video capture of a folder containing, I think, around 100 pages now being scanned. So this will give you an idea of the performance of the machine. I can start the video. And we don't have the sound on, but pages are being fed, they're separated, now proceeding beneath and over the camera. You can see the screen that has the color images that are being shown, and then finally down at the other end of the machine through the stacker. And the bright white piece of paper on the bottom, that's that initial bar-coded sheet at the beginning. So at this rate of speed, it looks like, gee, you could scan hundreds of boxes in just a week. But there's a lot of time to stop and start. There were very few times that pages would be damaged in the process of scanning. Paul showed you that photograph of things that had curled edges. If we put curled edge things down, they might catch in that second scanning cover. The machine stops immediately. Then we would have to repair those and do it again. But long story short, we got through all of the materials, and I'll give you the data at the end. Of course, in doing the scanning, we also have to track workflow and track progress. We just use a very simple wiki, and we're tracking events at the box level. What was the date that things were prepped? Did they get routed to conservation? when did we scan them, what's the date that we did quality control. So we had good process control just with a simple wiki HTML page. And as I said, the ultimate production was we succeeded in digitizing all 4,300 folders, 414,000 pages. And when you do the math and divide things with all of the costs for supplies, for the machine rental, for staff, including staff with benefits belonging to the union, with all of those costs told with the local control of that machine, we derived either 22 cents per document or 11 cents per page side. The actual scanning cost that you saw in that video was less than half of that. So it's just however you want to do the pie chart with the cost. Suffice it to say, much cheaper than previous methods, much quicker. Again, we did all this in 14, 15 weeks. And the actual average that we have, if you divide the 414,000 documents over 73, 74 scanning days, was about 5,600 documents per day. Oh, 74 days, I apologize. And in the previous phase of the project in 2011, we used 2 different vendors, and with their turnaround time and all of our packing and tracking and preparation time, it took just under 5 months to digitize 19,000 pages. So in terms of scaling, and that's one of the objectives that we have in this project, this was a nice fit of these technologies and tools and workflows that we adapted to the needs of the project. And I'll turn it back over to Paul now that you have a sense of how, oh wait, I'll have a question first, but now that you have a sense of how we went from paper in the boxes to, you can see how we have yielded digital file folders, and from the rest of the part, the rest of the workflow would originate with those digital file folders, and the remaining 2 steps that Paul will describe would be to extract documents and then to start assigning metadata to those. Question?
Steve, sort of a doubleheader. What would you consider a valid measure of OCR quality on a project like this, and by that measure, how well did you do?
Yep, so the valid measure of OCR quality, and so just Tom's picking up on the note that with this machine, the way it was configured, we output 3 files. So we have a color file, a black and white TIFF image, and that TIFF image was then fed through OCR processing, and we have an OCR generated text file. The valid measure of OCR quality is always resides in the transcription. What was the accuracy of the transcription? So as a human being, if I recognize a character that's the letter T, the OCR outputs a T or it doesn't. It's a very straightforward binary pass-fail measure, and one scales that across a whole data set. So, you know, what we really care about for the OCR quality would be, is it good enough for display? That's not our ambition in this kind of a project, given the really faint quality of the TypeScript. There's no scanning methodology that we could have that would make that silk's purse out of the sow's ear, so to speak. The input is of low enough quality so that the main uses of OCR would be for any of these 3. We've had projects where we're trying to go from that printed paper to text that could be displayed and rendered, say, in HTML format. There's no way that was our objective here. No way. Then objective 2 is when you run OCR without any human correction, is it good enough for indexing? If you wanted to set up a keyword search in full text indexing where what you then present to the user is one of those page images, say a color JPEG, is the OCR good enough to facilitate retrieval, mindful of the fact that a lot of the words that people are interested in might appear multiple times throughout the data set. So it's less than perfect, but it's better than nothing. And then finally, is the OCR, if it's not good enough for display, or it's not, I went in the wrong order. The gold standard would be it's good enough for display. The bronze standard is that it's good enough for search, that you never display it. Somewhere in between is the stuff that's good enough for search also good enough for analysis, as what you were presenting yesterday? Can you parse it to do topic modeling and to markup, to do the markup? So I took the time to characterize how we're going to assess the quality of the OCR, because now we have hundreds of thousands of OCR files that we need to analyze, in part with machines, and Paul can share some ideas on that if we have time at the end. But a lot of it is human-oriented. So we literally take our samples and we can print out a TIFF or print out a JPEG 2000 image And then we'll come up with those samples with the corresponding text files. Very often, it's just garbage. It's unusable. But sometimes, as Paul pointed out with those transcripts, where there's a consistency of type, and with some of these documents, it's definitely good enough for indexing and display. So it's very much a mixed bag. Yeah?
Question about the workflow. Do you do the prep, all the prep, and then you move to the scanning, or do you scan as you prep?
Simultaneously. We had 2 rooms, so people were doing prep in one room and then scanning in the other. So we had just one shift, one daytime shift, and people were working at the same time. John?
What format are you using for image storage?
JPEG 2000 with lossless compression at 300 pixels per inch. And then Group 4 compressed to, same thing, 300 pixels per inch. And then the text files from the OCR. That averages about 5 megabytes per page side. So this year we generated about 2 terabytes of data, a little bit more. Yeah?
Was there a discussion or factors back and forth about to PDF or not to PDF?
Yeah, so you know what? We do need to move along. So in terms of how we move forward from here, that's an excellent point for us to pivot to go to Paul. Let's think now, we're going to move beyond we wouldn't want PDFs for the page, right? So I answered the question that John asked was a page-specific question, you know, so the formats that we use for each page that we have for storage are JPEG 2000 and TIFF. Now, when we think about assembling those things into documents, this really starts begging a lot of questions about, well, what format makes sense for the document? How are you making the metadata? How are you going to display that? PDF was one of the things that we considered to satisfy those objectives, and we're not using PDF. You'll see when Paul shows you the page-turning application that right now we're using JPEGs to facilitate that. But a lot of the rest of this is metadata driven, and that's kind of the part of the longer-term scope of digitization. So we succeeded in processing a lot of boxes and a lot of folders this year, but now we have a lot of work to do to take those 300 folders and extract the appropriate number of documents and proceed from there. So back to Paul.
Okay, so we got everything digitized, but none of it is accessible, so we come to metadata. One of the things that I neglected to mention earlier, it doesn't fall strictly speaking under the rubric of metadata, but I mentioned that the collection was relatively chaotic. It was almost, it was basically dark. There was no index, there was no finding it. So our document analyst, Chapman, is still working, Matt is his name, with us now. He was the person who first had as his task to go in and look and collect all the boxes together that had to do with Nuremberg tribunals. He found when he did that there were a lot of materials that were not part of this collection, which were mixed in with them, like Tokyo tribunals were, for example, in there, and there were other collections as well. So it was a non-trivial task to get all this stuff together. And he was going to put together the first index of the materials based on the box level of the contents of the collection. So he came up with a box list, which we still use today, which is our high-level view of where case-related or evidence file series-related documents are contained within the collection. We use that to navigate among the collection when we do the digitization and we're doing the metadata. In the process of doing that, there was also another important component, which was he had to make sure, or he was hoping to make sure, that the documents within any given box followed in some sort of coherent sequence. You don't want to have one document that has 25 pages and 10 pages are here, and then maybe 3 documents later you get another 5 pages. You can see how that would play havoc when trying to get all the pages together for analysis. So he made sure, or tried to make sure to the best that he could, that documents were always contiguous. All the pages of the documents were contiguous, and that they followed a proper page sequence. That's important for our metadata flow now as well. So that was sort of the first layer, the highest level of metadata that we collected. Our metadata strategy is constrained by certain things. There's the money constraint, obviously. Metadata, as we're doing it, which I'll go into a little bit later, but essentially it's field-based metadata, which requires in-depth, deep analysis of the documents to be able to create. It's very, very expensive. So you need a lot of money. Originally, when we tried to come up with a projection of the total project cost back in the early 2000s, The grand total was in the neighborhood of $12 to $15 million, 5 permanent staff, 10 years. And that was primarily metadata driven. That wasn't, the bottleneck was not digitization there. So we've really been motivated to try to find some workflows that will deal with the metadata task in as an efficient way as possible. The data depth I just mentioned, that's another constraint. We are doing very in-depth description of these documents. We're trying to make them available in the richest way possible. And there's also time. We want to get these materials up within our lifetime. I mean, it is really a lot of material, and the way we're describing them postpones the publication of these things to the indefinite future. We want to try to limit that as much as possible. So there is definitely a process of prioritization. We're motivated to try to define which documents or which collections or subsets of documents are the most important for the project, what kind of metadata do they require for their discovery, and what can we do to streamline that metadata for other parts of the collection which might not be quite as critical. I mentioned earlier that the expansion of our audience base from researchers to the public, including high school level people, had implications for our metadata. We decided that whereas a researcher who's expert particularly in the field might have more of a clue as to what a particular code number might signify in terms of the contents within that particular file, you couldn't expect the general user to have that kind of knowledge, so we were motivated to provide that knowledge for the user in the form of a descriptive title, for example, when you had a title that was very significant in and of itself. And that required, in turn, a fair amount of analytical expertise to be able to define. So we actually increased our metadata task by increasing our audience base. So the documents that we have, as I mentioned before, the evidence file documents and the case file documents. Of those two, the case file documents are considered to be the core of the collection that we're particularly interested in getting out to people. They were the documents that were submitted in evidence. They're the ones that we use to make the cogent case against the defendants. So we definitely want to have those included. They're also the ones that the defendants themselves use to try to exculpate themselves. The evidence file documents are also important, but compared to the case files, they're in a subsidiary role. In the past, we did full analysis on everything. There's probably a breakdown of roughly 60% evidence file to 40% case file in the collection as a whole. So that being able to streamline metadata analysis for the evidence files in such a way that we could significantly reduce the amount of time that was needed to do their description as we thought sufficient was a huge step forward, a new step forward in our approach to the project in the last couple of years. Our data collection was guided by fielded search. We wanted to use some of the same kinds of data points that are used in typical bibliographic descriptions, so title, author, date, publication, or date of creation in this case. Subject-related categories, so that you can search across the collection and not simply be dependent on the vagaries of full text results. So we decided that in the case of case files, we would supply the whole metadata profile, including those terms I just mentioned. In the case of evidence files, we thought since they are subordinate in terms of their significance, then we can perhaps go with a data profile that might be more appropriate for a researcher who, given a particular code number for a particular document, could connect the dots and understand what the significance of the document was. So we eliminated the fields that were more analytically intense from the evidence files, and thereby decreased the analytical time required from an average of roughly 15 minutes to about 5 minutes per document. So we're getting 3 times the number of documents generated that we would if we consider them to be on a par with case files. So that was a relatively large change in our approach to metadata assignment, or the metadata task for this project. We're also keeping control lists of authors and trial issues for the case files, so you can do cross-document search and do it in a way such you can, the typical authorities file would allow you to be able to code your documents that have even variants of names together when you do a search on the authoritative form, or even on one that's not authoritative. The trial issues that we're tracking are, we call them trial issues. They're also sometimes referred to as activities. They are the activities for which the defendants are being prosecuted. And we're tracking those. And we're also tracking the activities or the matters that the defendants themselves wrote to try to exculpate themselves against the charges that were being brought against them. So in both cases, we're tracking and we're controlling and we're requiring full analysis for those to be present. The transcript also is a third type of document that we have. We have the transcripts for all the trials. That's roughly on the order of 150,000 pages. And with those, that's a little bit more future-oriented. We don't yet have the solution in hand for those. We have some ideas about what we want to do with them. They don't involve at this point metadata analysis of any kind. We're going to cross our fingers and all of our fingers and hope that OCR is going to carry us part of the way. The purpose of the transcript in the trials is that of being a contextualizing actor. It's a roadmap. A person can read the trial transcript and can find the submission of evidence in context to understand why it was being introduced in that particular instance. And so you can get the meaning of the document that way. And you can see, through the identification of the document, then you can then go into our document record, see the document's metadata, and then have access to the images themselves. So the metadata, the different levels of metadata, the one that Steve alluded to is document assembling. We have to assemble the documents from the digital images, the raw digital images that the scanner produces. Here it's really important, once again, to realize that the sequence of the scanning is very important. We cannot, of course, break down, it would be fatal to break apart the documents in the process of scanning and not preserve the order of the pages that were originally found within the boxes. So through the file naming convention that we have, we can document the box, the folder, and the page sequence number for that particular page. And any document breaks that you have when you're looking at the document images will always happen within a folder, so within the images that you see displayed. And our assumption is that the document would never go across two folders, and that so far has borne itself out. This is just an example of some of the email feedback we've gotten from people who were the reason why we expanded our audience base to include more than research. We had numerous requests from high school students for materials related to the project. In this diagram, you see sketched out the workflow I was just mentioning. We have at the top, we have the folders of scanned images that the digitization process generated for us. And then with our first phase, we have sort of two phases of analysis, or even three if you want to. You can consider three phases, actually. The first phase involves assembling the images together in discrete documents, giving them an ID, and then passing them on to the next phase, which is actually metadata analysis. So it's very important that we be able to track the document-ness of the images, and that the documents are in sequence, as I mentioned before, is very important for that. Once you have documents identified that way, the person who is involved with that particular task, either, if they are case files, then sends them on to the next stage of analysis, full analysis in this case. So that is a different person, our document analyst, with deep experience with the project, having been with it from the get-go. He goes ahead, and on the left you see, towards the bottom you see the kinds of fields that he's describing, or that he's populating. And the ones in red are the ones that take the majority of his time, because they're the ones that involve depth analysis. On the right, we have the so-called streamlined analysis for the evidence files. So you see that it's basically the same as for full analysis, only without the red fields, the ones that require actually reading the contents of the document to a large extent to be able to understand enough to be able to populate those fields. This activity is actually performed by the same person who does the document assemblage function for us. So at the same time that you see the images up there, you see enough of them, primarily it's the title page or the first couple pages, where you can populate the data points that they're required to do for the streamlined analysis. And on average, as I said, roughly 15 minutes for the full analysis, roughly 5-6 minutes for the streamlined analysis. The tool that has been created in our department by the same guy that developed the tool that Steve was talking about is Andy. He created this tool that are so-called, we call this process, it's a bit of a misnomer, but we call it virtual foldering, which dates from the time of the legacy workflow we had where our digitization process required a single folder for a single document. So it's simply the process or the workflow which deals with document level metadata. So this particular tool does both tasks. It displays the images you see on the left, the navigation pane. You see the box and you see the folder. So you see the contents of a single folder, the pages in sequence, thumbnails for the pages. And the person who's doing the document identification starts just as they would be if they were looking at the physical materials in the box. They start with the first image, they bring it up, they create a new document ID for that, and then they continue to go through the images in sequence, deciding when there's a transition from that particular document to the next one. When there is, then they close out the old document, begin a new one, and just repeat. So at the very top, the top right pane, you see the actual document, so they can analyze it. They can zoom in, they can zoom out, they can get a very detailed impression if they need to of the document. And then in the lower pane, you see sort of two halves to it. On the left-hand side, you see certain metadata fields, which are used primarily when they're doing the evidence file analysis and streamlined analysis that I was mentioning. So they populate those fields there. There's also a document ID field, which will be populated in the case of all the files. Because even the case files, in their preliminary stage, need to have a document ID to create a stub record for the person doing the full analysis to use. On the right-hand side, you see the pages that have been assembled into this document. You see them in sequence, going from top to bottom and left to right. And you see for each of those, for each of those tokens, each of those medallions represents a page side. So you'll see here for this 5-page document, you'll see 10 of these. So you'll see in the first one, that's page 1, which will be recto. The next one next to it will be verso. And we're tracking. You can't see it very well in this particular image, but if you look up at the top, the icons or the menu in icon format, in the upper right you see maybe 3 from the left. I'm sorry, from the right you see blank, and that's a notification that if there is, we make the assumption that verso is always blank and meaningless in the context of this project. But if it is actually, if there is text back there, you can click on the blank and designate to the system that there is actually text that has to be included when you actually assemble these images together. This is the interface that the full analyst uses in our access database, documenting the fields, or getting the fields that we can use for document analysis. Full document analysis, these are the controlled fields I mentioned before for author, for trial issues. This is the table that lies behind that's being populated. This is the basic document table. And then we move on to the website. The basic goal of which, of course, is access to the documents. It's just access, access, access. We try to provide contextualized via the transcript, rich via the field-based search, and flexible, and also the field-based search and the interlinkage, document discovery and access to digital representations of the original document. So we're trying to do a fair amount. Secondarily, the website also offers introductory materials to give context to users that might not be expert in the field. That's pretty much it. Those are the two purposes. It was launched in August of 2003. We currently have 3 trials up of the 13, so we have a good long ways to go. Simply, at the time we launched, there was a fair amount of international attention devoted to it. Most major news organizations in Europe and the United States took note. This is one of the major online news organizations in Germany, noting the fact that this is the first time that online access has been granted to this important collection. This is the website itself, the homepage, the introductions, introductory materials, as I was mentioning. Here you see the search interface. Most of the terms that the document analyst is looking at, we're exposing to the user so that they can search by them as well. You have both document searching, which you see up at the top, as well as transcript searching, which is based on full text. We indexed the full text for such as we had at the time of the case 1 transcript. And there was also some markup which was done. We have to see how we handle markup moving forward, if we do it at all, and if we do, how we do it. But in this particular pilot instance, we were able to do the markup. This is a typical document metadata search results screen. You see that we're exposing all the fields that the analyst has harvested. We're also linking out for all the control data fields that we have. We're linking out to other instances or to a search query actually that uses that particular field based on the value you're clicking on to do another search and to collect all the documents that satisfy that request. And then of course you see that there is a little arrow which you see right there next to the number of the document leads out to the image viewer, which you see here. Tom wrote that for us many years ago. It's still doing yeoman service. We'd be grateful for that. And so the user has all the dimensions of the document available for them, for both the metadata as well as the viewing experience. Here is a typical full text search on transcript. This is the document interlinkage. You see at the upper left, you see a document, a transcript passage which has hyperlinked in it, references to a particular document. You click on the hyperlink, you get to the metadata for that document. That full analysis is revealed. From within the document, you get out both to the image that's associated with it, and the images that are associated with that document, as well as you see towards the bottom, you see an arrow pointing from the document citation fields, the document citation values back to the transcript. So this mutual interlinkage is I think, one of the most powerful features of the website. Just a quick rundown of the tech stack we're using for data storage. Unfortunately, we're still saddled with access on the full analysis side. We're soon going to supplant that with the web-based MySQL or some other relational database backend. We're using Mongo for some of the virtual collecting data needs, MySQL backend for the website. We're working with Linux, PHP, JavaScript, and the indexer for the transcript is using a tool called Swishing. So quickly moving forward, we have three areas that we're really hoping to be able to explore in the near and the long term. One is distributed workflows, distributed analysis. Right now, we're doing everything in-house because we don't have yet a tool available that will allow looking at digitized surrogates for the paper pages and entering the metadata for that. So we want to develop an online tool, a web-based tool that will allow that to happen. And we've already got the tool available for the streamlined workflow, the virtual foldering task. After that, there is interlinkage with external data. Currently, we have interlinkage internally within the document set. We would like to be able to go out to things like Wikipedia to link data, for example, and enrich our author experience or the experience of the authors for the user. And also other collections that we might be linked out to, like Yale's Avalon collection, or Avalon project, or Cornell's Donovan Nuremberg collection. I'd also like to explore user-contributed tagging. We've had a great deal of interest on the part of users for helping out with the project, both in terms of correcting things that they see on the website, as well as volunteering and technical or knowledge-based services. Finally, the data delivery to the user. We do have an API. We have harvested the data out of the database into a platform that the Innovation Lab has created, which has basically done the Harvard online catalog, and we merged the sets together so we can do a cross-collection search for that. Also, possible bulk download of document and image data. This is our API. This is a typical JSON result set, resulting in query there from Nuremberg. This is a mashup, Nuremberg on the right, Harvard on the left for a common query. Just an example. This is a linked data initiative which is going on at the library right now to take authors within Nuremberg and to link out to things like Wikipedia for content, for predicates to places like schema.org, for authorities to places like Disney and beyond. Just a couple of emails documenting the interest on the part of our users to help us with corrections and to help us in general. So,
Thanks for letting us come right up to the end.
yeah.
And For those of you who wish to stay, I mean, obviously we're here, now that we're into the break time, we're happy to answer questions and you know how to reach us. And if you need to go, we understand that. But if anybody would like to stay and talk more about the project or ask any questions, we'd welcome that now.